Fáilte. My name is Andrew Healy and I'm a lover and drinker of Irish whiskey. I'm on a journey of discovery to learn as much as I can about the great spirit of the Emerald Isle. Along that journey, I'm lucky enough to meet other people who are passionate about Irish whiskey, and the My Favourite Irish podcast is their story and their favourite Irish whiskey. Whether that's their current favourite, their first ever dram, or one that has a special place in their life. On this episode of My Favourite Irish, I got to spend some time back in early March of 2023 with Brian Mast, co-owner, along with his wife Jennifer, of the Waits Mast wine label. I first met Brian and Jennifer back in 2010 when I ran the When Irish Wines Are Smiling event here in the Napa Valley, and it's been way too long since I got to spend time with Brian in person. Ahead of an event in San Francisco, Brian and I sat down in the tasting room of the winery where Waits Mast wine is made in the Bayview neighbourhood of San Francisco, with a dram or three in hand, and we had a grand old natter. We talked about Brian's family ancestry, with his mum leaving County Louth for America in the late 1950s, Brian's own journey from the Midwest to San Francisco, their wine story and how Waits Mast came into being. We also talked about their trips back to Ireland and their first trip to Glendalough. And of course, we chatted about Brian's first Irish whiskey and some of his favourite cocktails. And we did all of this talking while sipping on not one but three Irish whiskies, with the fun Burgundy barrel finished Irish whiskey from Killarney and two offerings from the folks at Glendalough. Listen along. Fáilte Arash, not at the bar, we're out at a tasting room.
Yes, at a winery tasting room.
Yeah,
in San Francisco.
Yeah, and I believe it's an unusual. What's the last one left here in the city?
Really, I think, just a couple of operating wineries in the city of San Francisco, and there's probably about 15 to 20 small boutique brands and producers in this space.
Okay.
So
when we're done with the whiskey, we'll get stuck into the wine. Is that
sure.
That's the plan?
Give me a long afternoon.
So Brian, I've known you for, well, I'm not sure we should say, but
long enough.
Quite a while, and wine is what brought us together originally.
It did.
Most people know that my journey in wine brought me to Napa. Ran an event back there back in the day, and you and Jennifer, your wife, with your Irish ancestry, came poured at both events, and
When Irish Wines Are Smiling.
Yeah.
We still love the name.
It was one of my better moments.
It was a great idea.
Yeah, it was, and obviously now my journey has taken me into whiskey, as yours to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So I found the excuse post-COVID to reconnect with you. Folks won't know it, but it's actually the reason we're both wearing green today is that it's we're shooting this on Friday, March the 3rd, so it's Irish Whiskey Day.
Yeah.
Although every day is Irish Whiskey Day.
Can be, absolutely.
So we started with the Killarney. Should we pour a little drop in our glass and then we can start chatting whiskey, wine, Ireland?
I think that sounds great.
Okay, so we'll start with the... You've got a story about this one.
Yeah, so I just got this for Christmas. My twin sister, Cece, and her husband are very small shareholders in this new distillery in County Kerry. And so they visited it. They had sort of a preview of it in the summer. And so she was sending me photos, etc. And so I was eager, as I'm starting to dig a little deeper into not just whiskeys and bourbons, but Irish whiskeys. I was excited that there was, something new on the scene. And so I was very happy to unwrap this on Christmas morning.
And you've enjoyed a bit of it already.
A bit. And I shared. I took it to my wife's family is here in the Bay Area, so we shared some of it over the holidays too.
Fantastic.
As one does.
Good. Yeah. Well, whiskey is for sharing.
Absolutely.
As is wine.
Yep.
As I think all the alcoholic beverages should be shared, especially nice ones. They should be shared in the company of good people. So I can tell it's from Ireland. It's got the 700ml back here. So you get shortchanged in Europe, unfortunately, on the bottle size. So we should say sláinte.
Sláinte.
Yeah, great to finally connect. We've been trying to get together for a couple of months now. Goodness, that's a lovely. And we're shooting this during the day.
Yeah.
You and I
we have fresh palates. So it's it's a good time to really capture all of the nuances.
I love the positive aspects.
I did have some coffee.
Yeah, it's funny. I find that I taste best, actually taste it and take it apart, take a whiskey apart, after I've had a coffee, about a half an hour to an hour after a coffee.
Interesting.
And I've found the same on my wine journey. Same with wine.
Yeah.
I don't know what it does to my palate, but yeah, it's early in the day when we're doing this,
Yeah.
so we've got a couple to get
Yeah,
through
few options.
and some stories. So we connected through wine. We mentioned the
Yeah.
When Irish Wines Are Smiling event. You and Jennifer have your own wine label, Waits Mast. You make Pinot Noir, which makes you a great person. Because I and Sandine are big fans of Pinot Noir. Tell us about how you ended up in wine. What took you there?
I mean, it was, we started to go up to Anderson Valley, which is 3 hours north of here, and go to the Anderson Valley Pinot Noir Festival. And I mean, really, it was actually when we first started dating, and going up to Mendocino was sort of a nice romantic getaway. But I was getting into wine at the time, and sort of started to lock in on Pinot Noir pretty early in my, sort of understanding and study of wine. And so then we discovered as we were going through Anderson Valley to get up to the coast, we're like, wow, there's all these great wineries like Roeder Estate, Handley, etc. And it's a small, even today, but even that was over 20 years ago, it's a small enough valley where when you go into a tasting room, you're likely going to meet the owner and or winemaker for the winery. And so it got us, and we're sort of nerdy types, but my wife Jennifer and I, we're both sort of nerdy about things. We like to sort of go deep. If we get really passionate about something, whether it's music or travel or books or food, especially, and then wine, we just got really nerdy and started to read a lot of books. But then once you're out talking to people, and in this valley where people sort of they felt a little bit more sort of like us in terms of like they didn't have a big fortune and build a castle and start started a winery or whatever. They just said, hey, we want to do this, and so it became sort of very sort of real in a way. And so when people go up to wine country, it's a departure, and you sort of have these. As you're driving back, and you have these fantasies of, well, wouldn't it be great if we had our own winery? Clearly, you might be, into your cups at that point, and you're not looking at the spreadsheets and the budgets. But
that's the romance of it.
It is, absolutely, and that's what's great about it. And so we sort of, it was not anything we sort of seriously considered. But we live in San Francisco, and when there was an opportunity to make wine at a place called Crush Pad, it's a place where you could go make one barrel. They had all the fruit sources, really high-end fruit sources from Napa, Sonoma, Mendocino, Monterey, and we just did it to learn. Right? It was not like to start a business and create a website and do all this compliance. We were nerding out. We wanted to just geek out and learn about the process of winemaking.
Not to use a pun on grape skin, but to get under the skin of it, to actually get your hands dirty, to transform grapes into wine. That wonderful journey that it takes. And
because it was in the city and 10 minutes from our house, we could do it while we still did everything else. We were just having a child at that point. This was 2005, 2006. And then it just became something that we got bitten by the winemaking bug, and we said, this is really fun, and the wine was really good. And then this place where we were making wine, they had a program where you could actually go commercial, very small, like literally 3 barrels of wine, 75 cases. But they had this whole turnkey system that had helped you set up your wine business. And so that for us was also interesting, because we're like, oh, this would be fun to see what it's like to run a really tiny business. Again, I had a day job, we had a family, there's plenty of other things going on, but it was all very sort of small steps. And we had no idea, there's no way we would have envisioned that I would be sitting here today talking to you, Andrew, and talking about a winery that we have now had in operation for 16 years.
Well, I firstly should congratulate you for that.
We're survived.
Yeah, and obviously we'll talk about COVID in a minute. You've survived that as well. It's not for the faint-hearted. And you didn't do it with we're going to buy land, build a winery, plant vineyard. That's the really expensive way to do it. But it's still, you talk about compliance. You're dealing with
grapes from multiple vineyards. I believe multiple counties as well, or is it all Mendocino?
At this point, it's all Mendocino
Okay.
County, and then it's with different vineyards within a couple different AVAs or appellations.
So, but there's still a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. And
oh yeah. I mean, it's the thing is that these days with a lot of businesses, you can do things virtually. So we don't have a retail sort of brick and mortar, but that's okay. We have a website and a web store.
and folks should know we're sitting in actually the tasting room of the,
Right.
of the winery building here. And we're not quite South San Francisco, but we're on the southern side of it.
This
here.
is in the Bayview district, so this
Okay.
is like one of the few last sort of warehouse working districts in the city. I mean, around us are warehouses where there's furniture and windows and who knows what.
Okay.
And so it's a place where there's enough space to actually
well,
to have a winery.
People can actually sit at this table and
Right.
taste wine with you and Jennifer.
Exactly. So there's a small tasting room. We share the space, so we sort of pay to share the winemaking space here. But it's perfect because then there's a sort of relatively minimal capital outlay. We're sharing costs with others, but we can host people to do appointments and tastings here and give people a sense of what is it like to make wine in the middle of the city,
Yeah.
which is different than what it might be.
Because,
people envision it being up in Napa. Right?
we'd look out the window here and it's not the rolling hills of Carneros.
It's not pastoral.
Yeah. But that's fine because that's the reality for you and a lot of other
Yeah.
businesses.
Well, and
Both
the thing that's interesting is that pre-prohibition and probably even pre-earthquake, 1906, there were a lot of wineries in San Francisco because there were a lot of bars, and I mean, there was, so it made a lot of sense to have the wineries close to where the drinking was happening. And then a lot of that went away over time, and I think prohibition probably had something to do with it as well.
Prohibition was responsible for a lot of things, and most of them not good. So.
This is lovely, by the way.
Yeah, we're obviously here whiskey is what's bringing us back together. Yeah, it's been interesting for me to see the number of distilleries grow in Ireland. We talked beforehand. I left in 1990. There was 3 on the island. Nobody can actually put a true number on what there is today.
3.
Yeah.
So Jameson.
Middleton, we're down in Cork. Bushmills,
Right.
up on the north coast. And we're going to talk about your ancestry, which is in County Louth, and that's where Cooley Distillery.
Ah, right.
In 80, I think it was an old alcohol manufacturing plant I bought in, I think, 87, converted, and I believe it had its first distillation in 89. So that would have been when I was in college, and I left in 90, and that literally was it.
Yeah.
And as I said, nobody can put a number on actually how many, but it's in the high 40s to low 50s.
Wow, that's awesome.
It is. No, it's wonderful to see it. I think we are reclaiming a part of our heritage that has been lost. And it's wonderful now that the guys and girls who are graduating college, they actually have a pathway into something that is, that's what took me in my journey around the world was wine. If this had have existed in 1990, who knows where my journey would have led me. But I look back, I see every day what's going on there, and it makes me immensely proud.
Yeah.
It really does. We're going to taste some Glendalough from Wicklow shortly.
Yeah.
But we've referenced County Louth.
Yes.
Your family
The wee
ancestry. Yes, indeed.
It is the smallest county, I do believe, right?
I believe you're. Yeah. And
Or one of them, it's certainly.
yeah, we'll check that, and
Yeah.
we'll
Fact
because I'm
check.
sure if we get it wrong, somebody will call us
If
in the
my
comments.
sisters were here, they would know all of the facts. They're better than I am at that.
County Louth, and it's Mum that's from County Louth.
Yes, born and raised in Louth Village in County Louth, and she, her father was the county doctor.
Okay.
And so they had surgery, the doctor's office right there in the same building as their house, and a farm. They had a farm back there, and so we were fortunate to visit and see my grandparents when we were kids. To go a couple of times as we were kids, but sort of how I'm here in the States is that my dad, so his last name is Mast.
Yeah.
That's a German name. My mother's last name, so she was Mary Fall, and so Faul. So I think that's sort of a derivation of of Farrell,
Okay.
right? There may have been some O Falls.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it's an unusual
yeah,
last name.
yeah. And so my mom and dad met in the late 50s. So my dad had gotten his PhD at University of Notre Dame and then wanted to do some additional studies and did some postdoc work. And so he had an opportunity to go to Dublin to the Institute for Advanced Studies.
In the late 50s?
Yeah. And I think there's also a connection with, like, at the University of Notre Dame, not just because they're called the Fighting Irish, but there are actually a number of Irish priests there.
Okay.
So there was also an Irish priest who said, like, you're going over to Ireland, and he had never been out of the country before. And so he's like, you're going over to Ireland. I know people there. And so he made some connections. And one of the priests at Notre Dame knew my mother's brother, who was also a priest.
Course,
I believe they were
of
both
course.
in the same seminary. There's all these connections. But my mom was also working at the Institute for Advanced Studies, and
there's
and
the
that's how
connection.
they met. That's how they met in Dublin on Marion Square.
Okay.
And so we always go by, when we are visiting Ireland, we always go to the door and take a picture in front of it.
Okay.
But at the time in the late 50s, the economy in Ireland was such that certainly for somebody who had a PhD in physics, there was probably not a lot of opportunities. A lot more opportunities in the States, whether you be in defense work or what he really wanted to do is be a professor.
Okay.
And which he ended up doing, being a professor of mathematics. But I remember our dad telling us the story of when he took a walk with my mom's father, asking for her hand, as it were, and talking about the future. And I believe that it was my mother's father that said, I understand that you'll be taking my daughter out of the country and that she will need to leave the country because you're not going to be able to find a job here. Whether you decide to go to England, which could have been a possibility, or back to the States. And so I think what my mom's dad did was sort of made it, he made it easy for my dad to sort of broach that topic, rather than my dad having to say, I'm going to have to take your daughter out of the country.
Going to marry her and
one
whisk
of the
her
coldest
away.
places in the Midwest in the winter, right? So he sort of made it easy on him and knew that that was going to be likely, and it was the smart thing to do in terms of employment.
1959 in late 50s in Ireland, whereas we jested before we started recording that everything was in black and white. Obviously, literally, photos and TV were. But,
that's my recollection.
But to me, it's more emblematic of an era.
Yeah.
Ireland, as we both know, and I've learned an awful lot more about Irish history on my Irish whiskey journey. It was not a prosperous country.
Yeah.
I remember that in the 70s and 80s growing up. It still was not a prosperous country. It's why so many of us left.
Yeah.
I left in 1990. My class of 31, 24 of us left. So it almost, I felt like it was almost hardwired into me by the time I came around that, well, off you go. I went to London. You mentioned people going to England. People went to the usual places, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, England, various places in Europe. It just seemed to be the way back then.
But that's changed so much, right?
Yes, and in many ways for the better.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's great that the kids who are graduating now don't automatically assume they're going to be shipped off to somewhere.
Yeah.
And I say shipped
there's
off in the best sense.
Yeah.
So Mum would have come to Chicago then, would it have been, or Indiana?
South Bend, Indiana. So my dad had a job back at the University of Notre
Okay.
Dame and being a professor in mathematics. So, it's always interesting to think about what that might have been like for her.
Yeah.
Having to not only leave her family and a big family, and go to a different country in a strange place. And they got married in the summer, so they arrived, and it was plenty nice weather. It could have been hot and humid, but but then the winters in northern Indiana are nothing like the winters, and even though there's a different sort of biting cold you get in Ireland, it's nothing like northern Indiana.
Well,
so God bless her.
Yeah, it's tempered. The Irish winters are tempered by the Gulf Stream, thankfully.
Yeah.
Even though it's
Right.
further north,
Right.
they're tempered. Those Midwestern winters and up into that part of
lake
Canada.
effect snow
they are.
is just...
Well, you grew up there,
So that's where we grew up, and I was so I have three sisters. I have a twin sister, so we're the youngest. I'm technically the youngest.
The youngest.
As my dad said, I was a gentleman. I let my sister go first. So I'm 10 minutes younger, and I have 2 older sisters that live on the East Coast. Okay. And then my twin sister lives outside Chicago.
And we're shooting this in San Francisco, as we've made references. So what brought you out here?
I moved out to. There's a whole other podcast video cast about this. So we'll the short version is I moved to LA after college for various reasons, and then thought it might be a brief stay. Ended up really enjoying being in California. Was in LA for 7 years, but I'd been up to San Francisco a number of times for work and some friends up here, and I really felt like this is where I wanted to live and sort of settle down. It's a great city. I envisioned, having grown up near Chicago, I always thought I might live in Chicago, and that's a great city, and I felt like I wanted to live in a city that maybe sort of had a similar vibe. Mm-hmm. Once I had decided I'm, staying in California.
Okay. Yeah,
so that was 1995 that I moved to San Francisco.
So you consider yourself a local at this stage?
Yeah.
Good. Back to the whiskey.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's my first whiskey from this distillery, and finished in a French Burgundy barrel.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Which obviously, for the folks who don't know, the predominant red grape in Burgundy is the Pinot Noir.
Sure.
Which is the one that we've referenced that you and Jennifer and your winemaker love to make and do a fine job with. It's kind of an interesting kind of sweet red fruit character to me on the nose.
Right.
That to me, again, and I haven't tasted a lot of Irish whiskies finished in red wine barrels. That to me seems to be one of the kind of the red fruits, the strawberries, the raspberries, maybe even hints of blue and black in there. And actually, sometimes it crosses over into dried red fruits. So you kind of think of a dried strawberry that you might use in baking or something like that.
Right.
That to me is the character that I get.
And I get, it's kind of weird. It's like cereal.
Yeah.
It's almost like when I remember when we were kids, we went on a tour of the Kellogg cereal factory in Battle Creek, Michigan, and there's this overwhelming aroma of grains, and so just like subtle note. I mean, you get those notes of sort of grains, and then it's the toast from that barrel sort of blends with some of those fruit notes that I think you're talking about.
Yeah. That's nice. I really like it.
Yeah.
A fun whiskey to start with. Mm-hmm. We're going to, because there's, as always when you get together over a whiskey, there's stories to tell. So when you and I were back and forth about finally arranging to get back together, and we talked about Glendalough.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of Glendaloughs. I brought one along, but one of them is yours as well. So you've got a few favourites. You're going to be the first person who actually had 3 of these lined up in a, which is, hey, it's all
part. It's a Friday.
It's a Friday, and it's Irish Whiskey Day. So, so you've come a little bit like me. You've come to Irish whiskey, relatively speaking, later in your.
Yeah.
I don't want to say later in life because we're not old yet.
We still have all our faculties.
Yeah, well, people tell us we do. We'll believe them. You and I talked again before this that whiskey would be the drink that we would have at the end of an evening.
Yeah, and I think that to me it's a ritual, right? And it's if I were to have just a glass of whiskey, maybe with or without some rocks, but it's something where it's just sort of nice to sort of settle in, after your meal. You might go to a different place. You might go to a bar. Okay, should I do what you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting to be around.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then to be around people who know wine intimately, like you do.
Yes.
Obviously, and it was a real learning curve for me to learn how to taste whiskey. Mm-hmm. I'm so used to. Get the wine in the glass, you give it a swirl, stick your nose over it, you're able to take a big, deep breath of wine. Then you get it into your mouth, you suck the air through it.
Yeah.
You do that with something that weighs in at 42%,
right,
and you're going to be off to see an ear, nose and throat specialist. So there's these ways to actually extract the aromas, and I call it the 2-glass trick.
Yeah.
I also think that adding those few drops of distilled water, it opens, it almost kind of, like an onion, it almost kind of peels back a couple of layers.
Which is how we think about with wine. you might decant wine to sort of open it up and sort of release the aromatics. And then it's also just having the right stemware. And, with the Pinot Noir, you have a more of a bold, sort of broader base in the stemware, and doing a lot of swirling to sort of really release the aromatics, and you get all of that. And then you do sort of the thing with your mouth, so you're sort of
so
breathing in.
So don't do that
swishing.
with whiskey.
No, not advisable.
Otherwise, we'll be off to an urgent care centre. Yeah. And it's interesting, I've been known to decant a bottle of whiskey.
Really?
I just...
And then leave it in the decanter, sort of, rather than putting it back in the bottle.
Depends. But often I would decant it, leave it there for half an hour, give it a couple of swirls, and then put it back in the bottle.
Oh, okay.
Again, to get the air through it.
Yeah.
I just think, it's been closed up under the cork for...
Small vessel.
We could look at the lock code, we could figure out how long it's been there.
Yeah.
And I just think... and also what I've learned is as you get down a bottle, it does change, it does evolve. I'm not sure how long it'll take before it actually goes the other way and you actually get less out of it than more. But definitely that little bit of air through the whiskey, I find, for me, similar to wine, it does make a difference. So, right, we've got a little bit of Killarney in our glass. Let's head across to Wicklow.
Yeah.
So, you had the double barrel. Let's try some.
Let's start there.
The double barrel, and then we got
the double barrel, and then we've got the pot still. So interesting to compare the two.
Yeah. So let me grab. Actually, I'll use these glasses for you.
Yeah.
There we go. You can have those two. I'm going to run out of glasses here in a second.
It's a good thing I brought the water for tumblers.
People, yeah. So would that be the tumblers now that we have here?
Yeah.
That be what you would serve your?
Yeah, just because it's Irish crystal, and it's obviously like more. We might use it for water glasses and for a fancy dinner or something. But
I poured the wrong one in there.
Yeah. But it's still nice to, especially if you're going to throw a cube in there or some rocks, then it's and it just has, when you're having a whiskey, it is nice to. I mean, I don't usually drink out of these types of glasses, but it's really good. But also, there's something about like a heavy, sort of low ball, sort of tumbler type glass as well.
Yeah, I use a Riedel tumbler.
Yeah.
The very fine glass. To me, it's more so the feel of it, as in the shape of it, as opposed to what you're talking about. Oh yeah, the weight of those is lovely.
Yeah,
it's lovely. So Glendalough, obviously it's somewhere that's pretty special to me.
Yeah.
I've been there many, many times. Love walking around the ruins and where the Round Tower is and the lake.
Yeah.
But it's a special place for you too.
I was intrigued to try this once I saw there was a whiskey that had Glendalough as where it's made or it's on the label, and it took me back to when my family, my wife and our child went to Ireland in 2009, which I think was the first time I'd taken them to visit relatives in Ireland, and so we went to a number of different places. We went to Galway. A lot of my family is Dublin, Dundalk, and Cork, amongst some other places. But my aunt and uncle, my mother's brother Stephen, and his wife lived in Dalkey, just outside of Dublin. So we went to visit them, and he said, "I'd love to take you to Glendalough, it's in Wicklow Mountains or in Wicklow." So I was like, "That's great." And so we had a nice lunch at the house, and then we got in the car and he drove us. And as we're getting close to Glendalough, he says, "Now," and I'm in the front seat, and he says, "Now, Brian, Jennifer's in the back seat. Jennifer, there's a book back there, and hand it to Brian. Now, Brian, there's a place mark for a particular page, so I'd like you to open that up."
Okay.
And as we're driving into Glendalough, he's like, "I would like you to read this poem." It's like, okay. And so I will read this poem.
Yeah.
This is Seamus Heaney, and the poem is St. Kevin and the Blackbird. "And then there was St. Kevin and the Blackbird. The saint is kneeling, arms stretched out, inside his cell, but the cell is narrow, so. One turned up palm is out the window, stiff, as a crossbeam when a blackbird lands and lays in it and settles down to nest. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life. Is moved to pity, now he must hold his hand like a branch out in the sun and the rain for weeks, until the young are hatched and fledged and flown. And since the whole thing's imagined anyhow, imagine being Kevin. Which is he? Self-forgetful or in agony all the time? From the neck on out down through his hurting forearms, are his fingers sleeping? Does he still feel his knees? Or has the shut-eyed blank of under-earth crept up through him? Is there distance in his head? Alone and mirrored clear in love's deep river, to labor and not to seek reward, he prays. A prayer his body makes entirely, for he has forgotten self, forgotten bird, and on the riverbank forgotten the river's name.
That's the first time I've heard that read. Thank you.
It's better when you watch Seamus Haney read it on YouTube, but
You did
I wasn't going to attempt an accent either.
No, you did a beautiful job. So this takes you back to that.
It was, and you know, Glendalough is a mystical place.
Completely.
And of course, when we drove in there, I mean, it's just like trees and valley and then so you see the St. Kevin's Tower?
Yeah, right now the round tower.
The round tower, which he's describing, like he's in this tower and he's stuck his arms out. That's sort of the legend, and these blackbirds sort of nested up there, and that's on the label.
And that's on the label. There he is.
That's on the label.
And I assume that's a blackbird.
I would guess.
With the arms outstretched.
Yeah. And so, anyway, it was just like it was such a thing that my uncle would do, because although he was a banker by trade, he was very much into the arts and poetry and music and theater, etc. And we always knew that. So it was just such a really special way to sort of bring us into that place and appreciate it. And of course, I'm a big fan of poetry and Seamus Haney and Yates, etc. So it was all, but you know, of course, it was very sort of misty and foggy there, and is exactly what you would think, you know, what you would imagine Glendalough to be like. So. Then I was like, okay, now I got to try this whiskey. And I'd read up on it. I heard that it, you know, had gotten some really good write-ups and
won some awards.
And it's not easy to find. At least this is double barrel, and it is aged first in bourbon barrels and then finished in Oloroso sherry barrels. Yeah. So I think that's also interesting, that you're going to get some of these different nuances from those different aging vessels.
So most Irish whiskey is aged in ex-bourbon. It's one of those bizarre things that has happened, because bourbon can only be aged in their casks or barrels for one fill. And then they've got all these, as you know, in wine, we can use a barrel 2, 3, 4, 5 usually is about as many as then it becomes neutral. Yeah. So all these ex-bourbon barrels get shipped across the Atlantic to Ireland and Scotland, and they get used in Irish and Scotch whiskey production. But where the real fun starts is that finishing barrel. So this is Oloroso. Yeah. You know, this was the French Burgundy barrel. Yeah. And Oloroso being the sweeter style of sherry is, to me, just tasting this, it actually needs the 5 drops of water in there. To me is very pungent, and it's jumping out of the glass at me.
Have you put some in?
I'm just about to.
Okay, let's do that. So, because I've tasted it now just before you've done that, so I think it'll be interesting to see how it.
4, 5. There we go. So yeah.
They also make one that is aged in French Burgundy barrels as well, which I got my business partner Patrick for Christmas. So
you bought it and gave it away.
Spreading, I know, spreading the love.
Yeah, and to me that's softer in the palate, softer in the mouth. Just tames it a little.
Right, it does.
Yeah, that now I could sip well, I won't say all day. Camera, but I could certainly sip it all evening. And interesting, the style here, it tells us here on the it's a single grain whiskey. So single grain whiskey is generally made from corn, believe it or not. Because we grow so much corn in Ireland, we decided we should make whiskey.
Right, exactly.
Single grain, a really important component in a lot of the blended whiskies in Ireland.
Yeah.
So it's firstly, it's economically, it's the cheapest style of whiskey to make.
Okay.
It's made in a column still, so continuous distillation, and generally adds this kind of sweetness.
Yeah.
So obviously, I know you drink
Interesting.
you drink bourbons.
Right, and bourbon is like, what is it, like at least 51% wheat?
is of corn.
Corn.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's either wheat or rye.
Wheat or rye, or you can use any cereal grain.
Yeah.
There's actually an interesting husband and wife team in Chicago using oats, millet,
Oh wow.
quinoa. And
Available at Whole
but
Foods.
it's 51% corn, and then they're doing some with 4 grains and 5 grains. So yeah, obviously different style. But yeah, single grain is a really important part of the Irish whiskey industry. It's kind of the unsung hero in blends. So, you know, the classic blended brands that we would know, like Paddy and Jameson, they've got some single grain in there. It just gives it that kind of, I won't say cheap sweetness, I mean cheap from a production point of view.
Right.
A great blending whiskey.
Yeah.
But on its own, it can really shine, and this one does. So
it's lovely.
It's lovely to try it.
I don't know. It just has a nice sort of depth to it, a warmth. You know, you definitely get some of those caramel notes.
Yeah, I agree. So, there obviously, when were you last back on the Emerald Isle?
Oh, it's been 11 years, I think.
Okay,
Now.
so pre-COVID.
Yeah, it was my
Why
cousin's wedding in 2012.
Okay.
And so we were there for a few days, and I'm trying to remember the castle that it was at, but it was where the reception was at.
There's the odd castle in Ireland.
Sure, there's a few of those, and then we then went to London for a few days as well.
Okay.
So it's been a while, and I think it's, you know, right. I think we were thinking about going right around the time of the pandemic hit.
Okay.
So then that sort of forestalled that, and we've got other things. But I really do want to go back
And the part of the world that your mum hails from, up in Louth, and obviously Louth right on the border.
Yeah.
There's now a number of really interesting distilleries up there.
Yeah.
So you could actually, both sides of the border and down into Meath with Slane. There's a now distillery at Slane Castle, owned by the big boys. So it's actually, there's a half dozen places to go visit within, I'm going to say, 45 minutes drive of Dundalk. So no, it'll be fun for you guys to do.
So we'd be visiting distilleries instead of visiting wineries, which is what we did in 2009. If you remember that.
That's right. Yeah.
So when we went in 2009, it was the first time I took Jennifer and our child there, and Jennifer was trying to, you know, she had not been to Ireland before, so she was sort of looking for things on the agenda that maybe she could relate to a little bit, and so partially she's into radio, and so we had some stops along the way where they were at some radio stations, college radio and that sort of thing, and radio history. But then she's like, did some research on wine in Ireland. I was like, what? You're researching wine in Ireland? I mean, you can buy it. I don't think they make it. But then she uncovered that that there were a couple of wineries, and we went to a winery in just north of Dublin. Starts with L. Can't remember the
Lusk is the name
Lusk.
of it? Yeah,
Yes,
suburb of Dublin on the north side. Yeah,
and so there's a fellow up there making wine with sort of classic French varietals like Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet, and growing it with tunnels, protecting it from the rain, etc.
Didn't you write about this at one stage?
We wrote a couple of blog posts about it.
Are they still there?
I think so.
Good. We'll share them below.
Yeah. It got sort of picked up because it's a curiosity. If you search for like wine in Ireland, you can sort of find our blog post because not a lot of people written about it. But there's a history as well. There's an interesting history with, I can't get into depth about it, but the wine geese. And there's Lynch-Bages, Chateau Lynch-Bages. There's Irish sort of connection to Bordeaux.
And we're obviously not tasting them today because there's only so many we can taste, but there's the Green Spot Irish whiskey range, which actually literally pays homage to the wine geese. So there's one of those finished in a Montelena barrel.
Yeah.
One of those finished in a barrel from Leoville Barton in Bordeaux. And bizarrely enough, just released this week in Canada, Pinot Noir finished from Quail's Gate in the Okanagan Valley.
Oh, right.
So I'm excited to get my hands on one of those.
That's really cool.
So I'm going to guess we should probably shoot a message to the folks at Mitchell and Son, because they're the wine merchants who created the Spot series.
Yeah.
That there's some ex-Pinot Noir barrels out here in San Francisco that are looking for a good home
Could
to
be
be
available,
filled.
yeah.
Wouldn't that
Got to
be-
rotate them out.
Well, you've got the Irish passport, so you tick that box for sure. So so perfect. So Brian, but we've got obviously 3 bottles here. We're going to jump into the last one in a second, and you have to be honest. First Irish whiskey, and I probably should say, and how old were you? But you don't have to answer that one.
Well, I probably would be maybe Jameson, and if I was in London in the 80s and I wasn't 21 yet, but...
You don't have to be 21.
Exactly.
In London, so
that's why it was great to go to London. But I think if I think about like when I started to sort of zero in on Irish whiskey and want to try some different ones, I think it was Redbreast 12 years. So my brother-in-law Martin and his wife Janine live in the South Bay, and I believe I must have tried it at their house because he had a bottle of it, and I was like, oh, this is good. I like this. And I think, also in, obviously I spent a lot of time drinking wine and thinking about wine because we have our winery.
Yeah.
And it's still, even though we drink a lot of our own wine, I'm always interested in trying other wines, whether it's other Pinot Noir or other varietals from different countries. It's just, that's how we got into this in the first place, a sort of passion and interest and exploration. So fair amount of time, of the days that I might drink during the week is dedicated to wine, but it is interesting and fun to sort of delve into whiskey, especially when you have whiskey and all the variations therein, but especially when you have an appreciation, understanding of wine and wine tasting and how it's made and how it can be appreciated. So then to try different whiskeys and cocktails and gins and things like that, it's fun because wine is, a passion, and it's a serious hobby and side hustle, and it's a business for us. With whiskey, it's just pure pleasure and appreciation, and you can it's a different thing to explore, and it's fun when there's a little bit of a link with your heritage, with Irish whiskey. There's lots of great bourbons and ryes here in the States. Not into Scotch as much, but open to it, but it's sort of like what I've been trying. And then there's, there's lots of interesting distilleries and great distilleries right here in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Right? Like St. George, their gin is amazing, and other spirits, and there's just, so much to discover. And again, it's something fun and different. And I still feel like very sort of early on in, my discovery of all this. And
you could open.
There's lots to
cost you a
lots
fortune.
to try.
You could open a new bottle every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you still wouldn't scratch the surface of whiskey internationally.
Yeah.
So, it's that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to your enjoyment of whiskey, then you talked about how when you would have a glass of wine, you're still working with it, as in you're not the winemaker, but it's your and Jennifer's wine label. You're always looking to see who's doing what, how can we improve,
right?
Which is an interesting statement, given your wine is. I think you make wonderful wine.
Thank you.
You're almost like a chef. When a chef goes out for dinner, they're the worst customer to have. Because they are, the plate gets delivered to them. The first thing they do is they check and see, is the plate warm? And then they sometimes literally will pick apart the food and critique it. You're like that with wine. So whiskey is almost like a respite. Would that be
It is.
A fair comment?
Now, I will tell you, though, the fun thing about going out to dinner and being, a vintner is once you make that connection with the wine director or the sommelier.
I'm in terrible.
Then, this one.
Too
many whiskeys.
I should be sacked from pouring.
What's really fun going to restaurants and you sort of out yourself as, oh, I'm a vintner, and we make wine and etc. And it's not just that, but you're also sort of engaging in conversation with them about the wine that you're drinking. Because often if we're going out to dinner, we're trying other people's wines.
Of course.
Want to get their advice on pairing, etc. And it becomes really fun. And it's a, for us, it's for Jennifer and I, it's a way to sort of really enjoy, sort of have another dimension to the dining experience, and to learn about the food and the wine, and to share stories and ask questions, and then what inevitably happens is at the end of the evening, is that the wine director, when you've been spending a couple hours chatting with him or her, and then they might bring out something special, and that actually happened last night. I was at Boulevard with a friend and chatting with the wine director and talking about just interesting elements of history of wine, and so we're enjoying our dinner, and then the desserts come out, and then he brings out a glass of Sauterne to pair with my friend's dessert, and then a glass of 1954 Madeira to pair with my dessert. And it's just such a nice gesture, and something you wouldn't like. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, can I have a glass of 1954 Madeira, please?" But being able to sit down and enjoy that, and also as part of the discussion is thinking about like what was happening in 1954 when these grapes were first.
Were your mom and dad getting hooked up in Dublin?
He was probably finishing his PhD on the path, though.
So I ask myself this question regularly, because I've had similar experiences to you, not as many as you. Obviously, I'm not a vintner, and this is the pot still there, just put it in front of you. I look back at my journey, and I think, when I left Killarney, in 1990, did I ever think I was going to end up here sitting with you and having the experiences that I've had? And I'm sure it's the same for you. You left the Midwest and
no. My experience with wine in the Midwest was drinking, Bartles and James wine coolers. So it was not as if like I was raised with like, a drop of Dom Perignon, when I was a baby. It was, it took a while to sort of get into appreciation for wine and spirits.
You mentioned Boulevard. Obviously, one of the more established and long-running restaurants here. You
almost 30 years now.
You all know this. I actually delivered wine to them in 1996 when I did a stint with Kermit Lynch.
Oh, wow.
I worked in the warehouse for a year for Kermit.
Oh, that's great.
And used to do deliveries.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what day the city was, but I know Napa was Friday, and we would go up and back then it was literally just the French Laundry, the Travinia, and Don Giovanni's. That were the three restaurants then. So, and I remember Boulevard at the time. So it's been around a long time. So obviously San Francisco. Yeah. You've mentioned whiskey and other styles of whiskey and cocktails. Are you a cocktail man? Do you like a?
I do like a cocktail. I tend to lean towards the dark water, but so I think probably my favorite cocktail is just a good old fashioned, and a Manhattan.
Okay, so you like the spirit forward
variations of those drinks. Yeah, I tend to not like cocktails that are sort of. There's a lot to try and discover, but cocktails that are sort of overly sweet, sort of cloying.
Yeah.
And so, but Sazerac, Boulevardier.
Okay.
Those are within all that sort of realm. But then gin-based cocktails. There's a lot of different ones you can do, and so it's fun to try and discover.
Now there is a place for those sweeter, cloying ones. Obviously, it's it's summertime.
Yeah,
is when it isn't. But of course, we're in San Francisco, so there's never a summertime.
No, it's really great Pinot Noir weather year round.
And I again happy to be corrected in comments afterwards. Are there any great whiskey cocktails? Do you know that have been invented in San Francisco? Are you familiar with any?
I don't know.
Okay. I'll do a bit of digging, and if there are, I will share it. I'll share a link. It wouldn't surprise me if there was, because you talked earlier on about wineries in San Francisco supplying bars, etc., that existed. Obviously, Prohibition, responsible for many things. It started one of the reasons why Irish whiskey, had its downward spiral. But and happy to be corrected again if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons cocktails really came to be the American thing was because they were trying to mask the horrible spirit that was being illicitly made during Prohibition.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm sure there are stories from San Francisco back in those
And I
days.
think it was also maybe some of the spirits that might have been shipped over that like just didn't survive the trip that well. Maybe I'm confusing the sort of that with sort of fortified wine, because that's sort of how like wine that didn't like survive the long journey, they would have to like fortify it with spirits and that sort of anyway. But yes, no, I think that is sort of the origin of and I think old fashioned was one of the very first.
Okay.
But it is something where it's like it's that sort of cocktail is it is very spirit forward, and it gives you a sense of, because I think the original old fashioned was rye based.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to try like and so when I'm ordering an old fashioned, I'll just ask like, well, what do you have?
Yeah.
And I'll try, if there's Michter's or Willets, or just there's just all these different bourbons and ryes that you could try it with, and you could certainly make one with an Irish whiskey if you wanted to.
I'm about to surprise you.
Okay.
You don't know this yet, but Powers, the old Irish whiskey brand, originally a Dublin distillery, obviously made in Middleton since the 70s, highly respected amongst Irish whiskey lovers. They launched a 100% Irish rye about a month ago or so. So the first one that's been made in the country's history. And it's targeted here, as you've just pointed out, at the American cocktail market.
Yeah.
And I actually brought some of that down for you. So you're going to get some of that to go home
Excellent.
with.
I love it.
And you can, maybe when you make an old-fashioned at home or a Manhattan at home, you can share a picture of that with me, and we'll let people see it. But
excellent.
But yeah, no, I think it's interesting. To me, it is interesting to see the evolution of Irish whiskey now and understanding the markets.
Yeah.
About 50% of all Irish whiskey production comes to America.
Interesting.
It's a very important market.
Yeah.
As you know, you've mentioned compliance a couple of times, it's 50 countries in one. So if you want to sell your wine in... we won't even go there.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same for
That's the least glamorous part of this.
It's the same. It's the same for any of the Irish whiskey distilleries. They go, we quite rightly we want to sell in America, and then they realise that it's actually it's a tough business.
Yeah.
You get your importer, and then you line up your distributors. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 distributors per state.
Oh yeah.
Here in California, it's essentially 2 states: Northern California, Southern California.
Right.
Texas is similar, but they're the markets you want to be in because they're the wealthier states. They spend nice money on nice products. It's a tough business, and obviously we're doing our little bit to help along the way. So, we've touched on COVID a couple of times.
Yeah.
Through this, how was it? Obviously, family-wise, you survived because you've talked about the family, which is great. How was it for business and winemaking?
It was interesting. I thought that it would be terrible. That just, I think everybody's fear at the time the economy was going to really tank, and it did take a dip for a couple of months. But what happened, and I think a lot of wineries found this, but for us, we grew.
Great.
Probably 20%.
Great.
Year over year from 2020 to 21, and the same for 2021 to 22, top line revenue. And, a lot of it had to do with, people were not going out to restaurants, they were not traveling. And, even if you're making dinner at home, the idea of going out to dinner and having a nice bottle of wine, it's all about the experience, right? It's a special evening. And so if you don't have that ability because you're not going out to restaurants, then at least what you can do is you can have a nice bottle of wine. And we all felt like every day was sort of, this became like the same. And so there's different things you can do to change up your day. And I think wine was certainly one of those things. And also what happened was there was a lot more interest in doing virtual tastings. We hadn't really done... I think we'd done one very brief virtual tasting with some friends of mine right before COVID hit. And then we said, well, let's try this. And then we ended up doing like spring releases, and we had like a wine director from one market, Tonya, we had her come in to do a virtual tasting with us,
Okay.
just to sort of mix it up. And
Yeah.
Shalini, our winemaker, joins us for many of those. We did some corporate-based tastings. So it was actually, it was a really great way for us to get our brand out there and tell our story, because we're a winery that's in San Francisco, and we are not sort of your typical winery. It's not like you can sort of roll up to the front door and say, okay, I'm here at Waits Mast, and show me your vineyards and show me the barrels, and here's your tasting room with all the tchotchkes, etc. So it's sort of hard for people to find us. And while we have a big base of our customers is in California, we do have a lot of customers and club members in other states that we can ship to, a lot in the Midwest, a lot in Texas, sort of as you say, and then a lot out east, mostly sort of New York and DC area. So for those folks, it was really great to have them join us on Zoom, and not only for us to sort of share our story. We would plan these Zooms as being like a 1-hour Zoom tasting. We walk through our story and our process and the wine and everything we taste together. Oftentimes people would buy wine to taste along with us virtually. But then it just became like hour 2, it'd be like,
Happy hour.
It's happy hour. And everybody's like telling stories, and everybody, was open to sort of jumping in and chatting, and you would almost like we would sort of fade into the background, and all the different folks that were joining the virtual tasting, they would be talking to each other and making connections, and it was just
Fantastic.
it was just fascinating and really fun.
Doesn't that kind of play to one of our base human desires or needs is to be around other humans, to
Yeah, to
socialize,
connect, yeah,
and to connect
yeah.
over something you have in common.
Yeah,
And obviously, the first hour is getting a glass or two of wine inside them, so
Sure.
everyone's
get a little marinated.
well. But
A little warmed up.
We've all got our stories to tell from the time during various lockdowns, etc. But I think that was one of the things that it's good on you guys for facilitating that. I think there are a lot of people who look back on that and they will have had experiences, positive experiences, that they would never have had otherwise.
Yeah.
And I hope that the benefits you've had, we talk about 20% on 20%.
Yeah.
I hope that stays now with you and it continues. And then people, when they come out here,
Right.
they actually get to meet you in person.
And that's what's happened is, as people have been able to travel more, some of the people that we met on those tastings have said, "Oh, we're coming out. We're going to wine country, but we're going through San Francisco, because you got to fly through San Francisco usually." And so we're on the way from the airport. It's really not that far, and so we've been able to host people and get to meet some of those people in person.
Great.
And which is fun. You sort of building these sort of lasting friendships, and yes, it's different these days, and it's always work, right? You always have to keep looking. We're not doing virtual tastings really that much anymore. We're doing more in-person tastings, but you have to find different ways to, introduce people to your story and your brand, and obviously make really good wine. I can't keep doing that.
Yep, that's a given.
And it's a lot of work, but it's fun.
Well,
I love doing
after,
it.
what did you say, 16 years.
16 years.
You obviously enjoyed it.
2007 was our first commercial
Yeah,
vintage.
you still got a smile on your face.
Yes.
So you're still. Well,
It hasn't taken me down yet.
I suppose now, we obviously, you used to call it a side hustle, but it is a legitimate, real business.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess now that when you go to Mendocino to visit the vineyards, you're able to expense the mileage and.
Oh yeah.
And that's what small business needs. It needs those breaks because, frankly, most wineries and wine labels don't make money.
Yeah.
So anything you
the
can
running
do,
joke is to make a
small
fortune in the wine business. You start with a large fortune. So
Yeah,
we're not even making a small
But
fortune.
it's great that you've started a passion project on the side. It's a legit business. Obviously, you've got dozens, if not hundreds, of people across the country who love you and Jennifer and the wines you make. And I've said it to you many times over the years. As someone who works in the digital marketing space, I think you guys do a rocking job with your emails, with your website, with your social media. It's real.
Yeah,
It's about you guys and the vineyards, and
just being
that's
authentic.
what it's about.
And I think, we learned that early on, and that, you can start making wine and, bring in the right winemaker and put your name on the label, but you have to be savvy with PR, marketing, sales, even though we have other people selling our wine for us to get us into restaurants, etc. But, it's like you also have to have a bottle of wine in the car. Not always, but like you have to be ready to
for the opportunity.
find the opportunity, and so you have to be up for that. You can't be just sort of
you're always out there,
back in the cellar, and as it were, and you have to be out there, and it takes a certain amount of creativity and that sort of consistency of keeping the story moving along. What are those different elements of the story that every year there's always something interesting and different and exciting happening, and so we're just trying to help share that with people. And
I know like I said, I think you do a great job at it.
Thank you.
I don't say that because I'm sitting here surrounded by wine and whiskey. I say it because I mean it genuinely. So we've sipped on the 3 whiskies.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap this up now in a second. Obviously, you and I will spend the rest of the afternoon polishing this off.
Of course.
We'll both
Obliterate these bottles.
We'll both be in trouble when we get home. Difficult question. Do you have a favourite of the 3? Is there one you enjoy more than the other?
So can you quickly describe pot still and the difference?
So a lot of people will know the expression single pot still.
Okay.
So the word single in Irish whiskey labelling means it has been made at a single distillery. And this says pot still. Reading between the lines on that, the folks at Glendalough, and even though you painted this beautiful picture of and it is a phenomenal place.
Mystical.
Glendalough, Oscailga, it's Glendalough, so the Glen of the 2 lakes. It's a fabulous place. I don't believe, and again, happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, I don't believe they distill for whiskey at their distillery.
Yeah.
So they're just, they to their credit, they do really well with their gin, and they have a rose gin, and they're highly respected for that. So this is, to me, this is a sourced pot still.
Yeah.
So pot still being under the technical file, as it's called, so the rules that govern the labelling. It is a mash bill of malted and unmalted barley that has been triple distilled in pot stills.
Got it.
So generally what you get in pot still is a couple of things. You get, depending on the yeast that's used in fermentation, you pick up a kind of an appley peary character and orchard fruits.
Yeah.
Not something we ever get in wine.
Right.
And you get this spice component, and the spice component comes from the distillation. So often led by black pepper, but sometimes going down the sweet spice. So headed into cinnamon, occasionally clove in there, kind of the Irish winter spice, winter bacon spice. And then you have the wood component. Yeah. So, the vanilla, kind of the oasty toki, we know about that from wine. So that's kind of the single pot still spectrum. And possible, you and I could go, I'm not sure where the lab is here, but we could go in there, we could write a full tasting note for this. Pot still being Ireland's signature style.
Yeah.
People are making pot still in other parts of the world, but it is intrinsically Irish. It has a history going back hundreds of years. Yeah. And every distillery should have a pot still in their armoury. Yeah. So that's...
The pot still, Glendalough, to me it has sort of a brighter, I get some high tones on this, right?
Okay.
Compared to the double barrel. And once you started talking about orchard fruit, and I get like maybe some apple pie.
Okay.
It's really pretty. There's almost a floral element as well to it.
And so we got the pot still, and we got the double barrel. Double barrel is single grain, it says it here, so we know that the majority of that is corn based. Right. This is all barley, malted and unmalted. Okay. So that's, to me, with the barley you get, you talked earlier on about bready character, so it's almost like apple pie is the cross between bready and that orchard character. This is the first time I've, I brought the pot still with me. I hadn't actually opened it until today. I like it. Yeah, I like it. It's pot still wise. It is on the cheaper side. So you mentioned Redbreast 12, a fave of mine. Now selling in the mid-60s a bottle. This is $40 up the road at K&L Wines. So as a kind of an introduction to pot still, I think this is a good whiskey for that.
Yeah, yeah. And this is only, the double barrel is only 35.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic whiskey. It's really good.
That to me is kind of like that's a Tuesday night whiskey.
Yeah.
It's just a simple-ish. It's got a little bit of complexity to it. Simple. For me, this is the eye opener.
Yeah.
In this is a really, really interesting whiskey. I really I love that finish that we talked about from the barrel. So
yeah. Now I go back to that. I really get that fruitiness on the nose.
And that's something people
makes
should be, who are looking to kind of get under the skin of whiskey, is pour them, taste them, but then come back to them.
Yeah.
Now, God, goodness knows how long we've been sitting here gassing away. It's probably 40, 45 minutes or so. So the whiskies will have evolved in glass.
Absolutely.
So no, it's been fantastic. I will, for folks who are still listening to us gabber on after all this time, I'll
bored you to death.
put links to obviously you and Jennifer's wine venture below, and obviously people can hunt you down online. And if you like a nice Pinot Noir from Mendocino, then you and Jennifer are the people to get it from. So we'll do that. We should probably do a last toast, and we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, to our friends and family and across the pond.
Yes,
and
indeed.
To yourself.
Yeah.
A happy early St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, indeed. Sláinte.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode. You'll find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll find the My Favourite Irish video series at irishwhiskeylad.com. That's Irish Whiskey with an E, LAD.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to leave a review or a rating at your favourite podcast platform. Until next time, Sláinte mhath.